Inside many marketing agencies, account management is one of the least clearly defined roles. And if you've been a listener of this podcast for a while, you will know that many other industries have that same challenge in defining account management. Is it client service, project management, relationship management, or is it something much more strategic? My guest today is Lori Bartle. Lori spent more than 30 years inside marketing agencies leading account teams, and she is on a mission to bring leadership into the account field. She's also the author of the book, The Agency Within Us. In this conversation, we talk about why the discipline of account management has become so misunderstood, how client expectations have changed, and why the best account leaders help create the conditions for breakthroughs to work. Here's my conversation with Lori Bartle. If you're an account manager, you're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Lori, great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex. I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about what happens when we accept the mantle of account leadership and we get out of the framing and the phrasing of account management. When I become, in my mind, or I create this team that is a account leadership team, and leadership is the word. Mm-hmm. What else? What happens at that point? How does the role change? How does the perception change? How does my value change? I know you talk about human agency in this. How does that get involved? So what does it look like when we decide, all right, we're going to reorient toward leadership as opposed to management?
Well, the first thought that I had was related to the idea of lanes, because in account management, I know I have heard people say, stay in your lane. And usually that lane is not one that we want to be in. It's going to be about executional things like budget and timing and stuff like that. And as an account leader, I believe all lanes are open to an account leader. We should have the perspective and have the ability to contribute. Okay, we're contributing to the thinking in every aspect of the client relationship. We should be able to contribute to the media conversation and the creative conversation and strategy. So that becomes an expectation, right? We don't show up to a strategy session to take notes. We've got our own thoughts. We've got business, maybe, some business situation that we can bring to the conversation that will help shape it. So my sort of, I don't know what it would be, my marketing slogan is all lanes are open to account leaders.
Great. Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. You're in the conversations, you're adding value to the conversations, and you're being the evangelist for your customer in some ways. You're helping the rest of the company see the voice of the customer.
Yeah, and it's good, it's helpful. It's helpful to doing great work. I mean, I try to distinguish between having an opinion and a perspective. Everybody's got an opinion, but a perspective is informed by hopefully, good, credible information, business grounded, whether it's the business or the brand, what have you. So that was my first thought. Agency, so human agency, when I did the research, one of the complaints that came through loud and clear, Alex, was reactivity. That account people are really rooted in reactivity, and it has a domino effect on all of the work, and it's so frustrating. It's a trap and hard to get out of. And so I started studying proactivity and really quickly uncovered the idea of human agency, because within human agency, initiative and proactivity is inherent in what that concept is. And so then the idea of agency within an agency turned into this idea that flowered into this book. But ad agencies, like there are certain environments where human agency thrives, and it's environments where you have a lot of autonomy, and it's about complex problem solving, and there is a tolerance for risk. So people feel empowered, and they feel confident to act because the environment around them wants them to act that way. And of course you need to be reflective, and you need to be able to adapt to what happens. But so this idea of agency within an agency was just really fun, and so the agency within us became the title of the book.
It's a
And
great title. Yeah, it's a great title. And I like the energy behind, you're really pulling on this idea of human agency and what are we doing and how do we get more proactive. It makes a ton of sense, especially given the account role.
exactly. There, it's funny too. The aha for me as I got into it was the connection to leadership. So now, pulling back to this leadership theme, as it turns out, and I didn't know this when I stumbled onto it, people with high agency have a tendency to take on leadership roles. And people that are in leadership demonstrate many of these high agency qualities like resilience and empathy and accountability. It's so important for an account person to own their work, right? We cannot point fingers. We have to own it. When we're part of making a decision for better or worse, we have to own it. And when we do, that builds trust, right? Our teams want to feel that we are in it with them. We cannot be paper pushers or, facilitators. That isn't leadership. Leadership means you make a decision, you're holding hands for better or worse. And that's again with your client, with your internal teams. And, we're going into this, and you have less fear, right? You move from fear-based to ownership because you feel confident. You've done your homework. You know the business. You believe that creativity and innovation makes sense for this brand, right? Like you go into a decision informed, and you feel good about it, and you make the decision, and for better or worse, you learn from it, right? If it doesn't work out the way you thought it did, you're not worried about losing your job. You just learned something, and I'll never make that mistake again, and you move forward. So it changes everything when you have high agency. It's really fascinating, and it's not hard to develop it in ourselves. That's the funny thing, it's not hard to develop more agency if we once we decide that's what we need.
Okay, so then let's go into that. How does one develop more agency? So if someone's ears just perked up hearing you talk about all this stuff and you say it's not hard to do that, how does one go about this?
So you need to stretch yourself. You need to take stretch assignments and ask for stretch assignments, and allow yourself to imagine that you are capable of more, right? That's part of building that muscle, that growth muscle. But you talked about the growth mindset, Alex. We have to live and breathe this idea of continual learning and growth. That
Yep.
is a huge driver of human agency. But there is a piece of the puzzle that's about the organization itself.
Okay.
Does the culture and the structure and the politics of the agency actually encourage empowered account leadership,
Well, for,
right?
for sure. I mean, that came to my mind is like, okay, this all sounds great, but what happens if your boss is stuck in the old way of thinking?
Exactly. I mean, if you're running up against an organization that actually wants account people to function like project people, then that's probably not the place for you. It's really interesting. Yeah.
And
So
by the
those
way,
are some,
a form of agency is being proactive about your career and
absolutely.
where you invest your time.
Absolutely. Work agency is about understanding, basically making choices, right? Informed choices, and then taking action against them. So you're right.
One of the things that comes up in conversation with people in the marketing world, so agencies, in particular marketing agencies, I've gotten this vibe, and I'm not the only one, that the account role is widely misunderstood, sometimes within the agency itself, and certainly to the external world. How did we get here, and what is going on? What do we need to know about this identity crisis that we're in right now?
In the ideal sense, it's a very essential and critical and strategic role. But over time, it has not gotten a lot of love. It has been, you know, I would say, I mean, the industry is not notorious for training our people, Alex. I mean, I think anybody that works in an agency would say that, but it's the role that tends to be stoic and thinks that we don't need anything. Oh, we're good, right? We don't need that training. Go ahead and train the media people because, they really need to be, uh, they're the priority, or the creative team is the priority, or the strategy group is the priority. The account team never tends to get the love, and it's showing now. And so what you have now is a value proposition that's become very weak and convoluted and confused with project management. And that's the situation that we are in today, where project management has really come up as digital, and through digital agencies, I would say they definitely leaned on account management, and it's become confused, and that is not sustainable for our discipline.
Well,
So
that's really the crux of it. And I've talked to a lot of people, some on this podcast, some inside the Amplify community, so some of our members. And there's a lot of overlap and confusion around project management versus account management. For some reason, it happens a lot in the marketing world. It happens in other industries too, but I just feel like it comes up along a lot there. And you described, therefore, a weak value proposition on the point of account managers. What do you mean?
well, when the question is asked, what do they do?
What do these people
how
do all day?
how are they driving value? Yes, exactly. What do they do that's different than my project management team? There are instances where there's a question of whether or not the account team can be billable in a client engagement. So clients want to understand it. Clients want to be clear about what their account team is all about. And as you probably know, clients' expectations of agencies have really spiked. They want more than great service now. They want and need strategic, business minded partnerships. And if we have an account team that is confused with project management, that's a real issue for the agency.
What's the way out of this? What is your prescription here? How do we create maximum space and differentiation between the project management roles and the account management roles? And even as I'm saying account management roles, Lori, I have an idea that you've got an opinion on the word account management and whether that is the right word here.
I mean, the key is to get to account leadership. We've got plenty of people to help with the management of things, and project management, and obviously financial management. It will always be a part of the role, but that's not what we're here for, right? We're here to help lead. Our clients and our teams need us to be leaders. And that means today that they need to be business savvy and think business first. So when you think about a business minded account leader, that starts to frame the role completely differently in terms of who we have in the role, what the expectations are for them, what gaps there may be in their skills, and what we need to level up. It just completely reframes the situation, and I believe can be the secret weapon for the agency that really understands the upside of making that shift
So it's a secret weapon if we do it right.
if we do it right. Yep. Because it's not going to happen overnight, Alex. It's taken a long time. This was historically a very strategic role, and it's happened over time for lots of reasons. But the lack of attention is now showing. And so we've got to acknowledge it and put a plan in place and start the process.
So are you talking about throwing a bomb underneath the whole thing and starting over from scratch, or are you talking about, slightly refining or improving the structures that we currently have? Like, are we past the point of no return on this and we just need to start over?
No, I have a readiness assessment that I use with my clients to help understand where they are in this process, and everybody's in a different place. And in a lot of instances, Alex, you have some teams that may be functioning at a higher level and some that aren't. So understanding who we have and being realistic about what you need to do in order to elevate the entire group, what you call it, again, what are the goals, the expectations. We've got to level those things out, because oftentimes when you have the different skill sets, you end up with a double standard.
So tell me a little bit more about this double standard here that you're mentioning.
It's a terrible thing when you're doing new business and there's a sensibility within the agency that there are A teams and B teams. Every team should be an A team. Every team should have the same set of expectations. It breeds resentment when you're not on a level playing field, and truly, for the high performers, it can lead to burnout, which is a real problem in our industry. So we've got to level out the expectations and be prepared to make changes if we need to, if the people in the roles aren't equipped to do the kind of work and thinking that we need for them to deliver on the ideal of a leader.
So, Lori, what's your prescription then for getting started? Say we're looking at a team, or maybe even starting from scratch with a brand new team and a brand new organization. How are you going about understanding skill sets, job roles, roles and responsibilities? The scaffolding and the system that goes around this in order to drive maximal success and to get around and through the double standard and the burnout that you were just talking about.
Yeah, so I mentioned I have a readiness assessment, and it explores 4 different areas, 3 of which I consider the key value drivers, Alex, and all the research and the due discipline that I did in preparation for this new role. What rose to the surface consistently in terms of high value drivers for an account lead were driving growth, which you're all about, fostering high performing relationships, and influencing creativity. So those 3, plus what I call the organizational foundation, those are the 4 areas that my readiness assessment will dig into. And we will come away with, I've got benchmarks to compare them to, and we can understand, where they're at. And then we go and we do one-on-ones and we talk about where we are. But that helps to sort of set the baseline of where an agency is at. And again,
Great.
it's not one size fits all, obviously, moving forward, but that's the start of it.
So that was a growth mindset was number 1. Number 2 is fostering high performance relationships. Number
Mm-hmm.
3 is
Influencing.
creativity,
Yep.
influencing creativity, and then the 4th is the foundation for everything. So let's go through those, because I want to get into these. So when
Okay.
we're evaluating someone on the growth mindset, how do we know which column we're in, good or bad column? What are you looking for? What are you listening for? How
Are
can
they,
someone take this to their team?
well, you could argue, do they see themselves? Well, the question is, do they demonstrate active participation in growing the client's business? In my research, the answer is 50-50. Roughly half of account teams do and are given credit as doing that, and half of them are not. So that's really, I think, shocking. You have to ask yourself, how can half of the account teams and agencies today not be doing that? Why aren't they? Is it because they don't have the tools? Or has the expectation not been made clear? And Alex, it's probably both. It's probably a little bit of both. It's really strange to think how ambiguous, again, this role is, and how ill-defined it is. And so there's that. Do
So,
they
so
do
right, so
they
right off the bat, half of the teams are underperforming on the critical number one metric of growth.
Yes. Right.
Okay, that's admittedly, a cause for concern for a lot of leaders out there. Uh, Leaders, if you find yourself in the situation where you're looking at your team and only half of them are performing, you got to start asking yourself what's going on here. By the way, to Lori's point, you also have to look in the mirror and say, to what extent am I not being clear about my expectations for the role and for my team as well? And do we have the right metrics? So that's also part of the conversation.
Yes. Just was it last week or the week before? I had an opportunity to have some time with some CEOs in Southern California. And the question that I posed to them was, do you consider your account teams growth engines or cost centers? And 100% of them said growth engines.
Oh,
Great.
good.
How
Okay.
effective are they in meeting that expectation? 2, 2.5, 3. So
Out of 5, out of 10, out of what?
yeah, out of 5.
Out of 5. Okay.
Out of 5, yeah. So
So
that
kind of underwhelming.
right. And so
So
what
the
are you
CEOs in
doing
this
about
case,
it?
CEOs, the corporate leaders, they've gotten the message. Their radio antenna is getting the message that account teams are for growth, and at the same time, they're realizing we're not performing at the level that they'd like.
Right. Somebody else is doing that job for them. We had lots of great conversation, and one of them said to me at the end of that session, he said, Lori, I feel like we've spent time on this discipline, and I thought that we were in a good place, but as I walk away from here, I feel like we need to revisit it. And for
Yeah.
me, that was that was a success for the session, to get them to think really critically about what's going on in the discipline.
And furthermore, to fund it appropriately. So, for example, in my book, The Growth Department, I have a whole chapter on the economics of expansion and growth to make it like overwhelmingly clear why we should be spending money on this and doing it right. And so, one of the traps that a lot of companies fall into, and this may have been reflected in the conversation you were referring to, Lori, is yes, I have the idea that my team should be doing growth, but I'm funding them like they're a bunch of PMs, right? Or I'm not giving them the tools that they need. I don't have clarity on the economics, or at least that clarity is not trickled down to everyone else inside the company.
One of my follow-ups for the CEOs in that same discussion was, how does your CFO think about the account teams? Do they
Great
view them
question. Great question. Yeah.
as growth engines or cost centers? And the majority of them said cost center.
Okay.
So again, are you and your CFO not aligned? How are
That'll be an
you?
interesting discussion. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And let's get busy. We've got work to do.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the first thing the first one we're evaluating is, growth, and are we delivering, and are we aligned in that mindset? The second
Mhm.
was fostering high performance relationships. Tell me what that means, and tell me what we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, in my book, I talk about it as engagement and collaboration, leaders of engagement and collaboration, because that is really what I heard, again, when I was doing original due diligence about the role. And since then, I've refined it to be about high performing relationships, because as I sat with this need to make the role more connected and accountable to business outcomes, I didn't think that collaboration and engagement was strong enough. So I have changed that language to be about high performing relationships, where the litmus test, yes, we like each other, we enjoy working together, we collaborate well. At the end of the day, what we do is productive, and we're driving growth and we are pushing each other, and all the outcomes are what we would want them to be. And that includes with your client, and it's about your internal relationships, because how we function within the agency is obviously of critical importance. And so they've got to be considered together.
Uh, so it's both internal relationships and relationships with the customer. When it
Yes.
comes to the client, the risks that I see always happen are twofold. Number one, we are focused on too few people, right? So our relationships are too few. Like, you might have a $10 million account and you got three people you're talking to all day.
Mhm, mhm.
That's an issue. That's a risk from a growth perspective, from an account management perspective. The other is that we are simply too low. We're too far down, and we're very happy talking at the manager level or the IC level or type of thing. And we are very cautious about talking to the VP or the C level, or we're afraid to, or we don't have those relationships. So you got to be able to look at that and score that as well in your matrix, I assume.
Mhm, mhm. You've got to be able to have a robust conversation with your client about the business. I like to say, going back to growth, Alex, I have a little saying: to grow the business, you have to know the business.
Mhm.
So in my work, in my training, in my book, I talk about a business first mentality. And I put out a challenge on LinkedIn recently where I said, here's an idea: take your client out to lunch and talk about nothing but the business. Do not talk about marketing. Do not talk about the brand. Nothing about timelines or any of that stuff. Just talk about the business. And I
Yep.
really believe that if our teams had real business acumen and deep understanding of what was happening with the business, then you will have the confidence to have these conversations with these people in these other roles you were mentioning, of which marketing represents about 5% of their vision, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're solving all kinds of problems at different levels. And so I really do think that getting teams to think of themselves as business people is part of my job as an advocate for this discipline.
I really like the to grow the business, you need to know the business. That's a fantastic phrase, and a challenge. I would challenge everyone who's listening to this conversation here, everyone who's listening to this episode. How well do you truly understand your client's business? Are
Mhm.
you in it? Do you know how they make money? Do you know how they go to market? Do you know if they're profitable or not? Do you know their growth rates? Do you know the levers that they can pull to improve any of those? Those are really important conversations to have. Those are great questions to be asking. And by the way, to your point about taking your client out to lunch to talk about business, people love to talk about their business. They love to talk about this stuff, and
Exactly.
give them an opportunity to show off how smart and well informed they are about their company. And it's something that is massively overlooked, and people don't do this enough. So I like that idea. By the way, there are not enough business lunches happening these days anyway because
That
of
was the
Zoom.
point of my LinkedIn. That was the point of
Yeah,
my LinkedIn post. It was, let's bring back the client lunch, but with a twist. Let's
right.
make it about business.
Yeah, I'm all for the client lunch. Now the third one that you were talking about there was related to influencing creativity. Now, presumably this is going to be more in the marketing realm and not so applicable to other areas. But tell us what you're looking for there.
Well, so the state of creativity in marketing and advertising is in question and in flux all the time now. Clients are more risk averse. Work tends to be more formulaic. There's a data driven requirement
Yeah,
that
everyone's
may
using the same LLMs and the same dashboards and the same models and has the same ideas, and they all went to the same design schools and business schools, and boom, so we get the same stuff.
exactly at the expense of big, bold ideas that are going to build brand affinity and long term growth, because a lot of that work that we were just talking about meets short term goals, right?
Okay.
But the
Mhm.
long term growth, we need that. And so I believe that agencies don't recognize how account teams can help in this challenge, because right now they're very much removed. Again, going back to my research, when I asked the question, do you agree that account teams function as influencers of creativity and big ideas? Most of the agency, everybody except the account teams, I think the number is around 24% agree with that statement. Account teams agreed at around 47%. So they have a very skewed perspective of their contribution in this area, which is a problem. Like, that's another problem. But
Tell us those stats again. I want to make
okay,
sure that didn't get
the
lost.
account people, I believe, scored themselves. The agreement came in around 47%. The rest of the agency, because I was able to pull out the rest of the agency, was at, I think it was 24%. So it's really low, Alex. They don't, there's the perception is that they're not connected to the work. They're not helping to drive creative ideas and innovation with their clients. And so for me, there's huge upside in this. Like, if we could grow that number by 10%, what's the lift that agencies feel there, right? And so I listen. I listen for sources and tools in all these areas. And last year, a firm out of the UK called the Better Ideas Project was a piece of research that talked about how ideas are evaluated. And it demonstrated basic things like the importance of a brief. This was a global sample, by the way, that included clients and agencies. Everybody agreed that the brief was a very important piece of the process. But when they said, and is the brief being used when ideas are being evaluated? No. How are clients in terms of providing feedback to creative ideas? The clients didn't give themselves a very good score. Agencies gave them a really bad score in terms of giving good feedback. So, there are really easy ways that account people can help and plug in and create a much better creative process for ideas to be evaluated, and the idea of criteria being attached to evaluation of an idea. I mean, the worst thing is to allow a client to look at an idea and think of it in terms of budget and timing, right? I mean, those are the things that are easy to default to. So we have to give them the strategic rationale. We have to help them understand, here's why this idea works for the business, for the brand, because of an audience insight, whatever it is. Why it works is how an account person can plug into that creative presentation and bring some real rigor to the evaluation of ideas. And again, this is how I operated. I mean, my creative teams used to have to tell me, Lori, stop, you're talking too much. But we need more engagement from the account teams. And if you have a great relationship with your client, your perspective has weight. And when it comes from the philosophy of the business, it's very credible. And I just think that if we can stimulate that muscle, exercise that muscle more, agencies and clients will benefit, and we will start to see, more great, exciting work getting produced.
I want to take what you just said and reflect it back on the opening of our conversation here, because I've got some confusion and I want to make sure I get this right, and I want to see how these things resolve. So when you're talking about the things that you go through in your assessment, this number 3 one was creativity.
Right.
And you're saying that account managers or account teams generally rate themselves far higher in this process than everybody else. So there's some kind of gigantic mismatch going on there where, we're actually not that great at it.
Yeah. Yep.
However, we also said earlier on in this conversation, one of the things that account teams are suffering from within agencies is overlap and lack of clarity between their role and a PM's role. To me, when I hear this, I think, boy, all this like coming up with ideas and doing creative stuff, that sounds like it belongs to somebody else. Am I wrong about that? How do we reconcile this?
Well, this is where if you establish that your purpose is about account leadership or business leadership, then influencing creativity is part of your job. It's in the job description. And we will train people to feel that they can, that they have the business perspective to bring to a conversation about creativity. And that's completely different, obviously, from project management. So it kind of pulls you back to the beginning, Alex, and it's about reframing the role, elevating the role, and being clear with what our expectations are so that they can, again, live up to it, get trained for it if they need to, and be accountable for it. Because, by the way, accountability, I mean, that's what I've been focused on for the last year, is making sure that there are mechanisms in place to actually track their their success in these areas. And that, when we have that in place, then my CEOs hopefully won't bat an eye about investing in the teams, because there will be mechanisms in place that demonstrate progress, right? And whether it's ROI, ROE, whatever the measure is, it's being measured as it should be.
So let's talk about that then. So what are the ways that we should be thinking about what I would call acting like an owner, right? Which is the accountability part of this. How do you how
Yeah.
do you how do you think about that? Like, what should we be tracking? Where does this belong? How do you orient around it?
Well, so we were just talking about creativity, and that's one of the areas where, when I work with account teams, it's one where they will admit, Lori, we don't even know, where would you begin as far as measuring something like that. Well, you can you can literally track the kind of work that you're doing. If you've got a client that has a tendency to do versioning, right? We're going to adapt. We're adapting work that's 5 years old. You could create a goal for the account team that says, we're going to try to introduce 2 new ideas this year, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's just, we're the focus is on developing something new, some new work that is not derivative of something that was done 5 years ago. That's an example. Influencing creativity. Let's say an account person says, I'm going to create 2 opportunities for my creative team to meet with my client outside of creative presentations, just get to know each other as people and talk about the business, right? If the only interaction that a creative team has with their client is in a presentation, that doesn't give them, that's a hard place.
Yeah, that's a great
So,
example.
right, those are examples of how we can start to reframe. Again, we want to set them up for success. It needs to be realistic, but if you just think about it that way, there are things that we can do that will put our teams in better position to sell bigger, bolder ideas as account people. And again, it comes back to relationships and high performance. Like, all these things are connected, but those are 2 examples, Alex.
And so how are we bringing accountability and essentially ownership when it comes to the high performing relationships part and when it comes to the growth part? What are we tracking there?
Well, so again, you have to know where you're starting, right? So hopefully there's a starting point. If we've had an opportunity to do an assessment, you've got some sort of a baseline. With growth, the things. There's retention rates, there's organic growth rates. I like breaking organic growth into 2 sides of the coin. There's true incremental revenue, and then there is looking at your current relationships and agreements and figuring out if there's a little couple of extra percentage points that you can squeeze out of that existing relationship by eliminating the squish in your scope, right? Scope squish, yes. So those are some examples. And again, you have to make that the goal. Oftentimes, account teams, their goals are task oriented, or they're just not, they're not about the things that matter. So if we're really focused on the things that matter, then that helps to prioritize. It helps in lots of ways downstream. In terms of relationships, usually there's some sort of a client satisfaction survey that's in place. Those are not hard to utilize and be accountable to, and understand. Again, we're talking about not just the client, but your internal relationships. Um, in that CEO forum that I was mentioning earlier, one of the CEOs mentioned one of their staffers that was really good at the growth side of things, but not was basically an irritant or worse when it came to the internal teams. And so, like then she said, "Gosh, now I really have to think differently about this person that's so good on growth, because they're driving my internal team crazy for X, Y, and Z reason." So it's a lot about balance, right? So, if you know where your relationship sits, one of the great exercises that we can all do is to put ourselves in the shoes of our client, or put ourselves in the shoes of our creative partner. What can I do to be a better partner to them? What are their challenges? Um, how can I drive more value in this relationship, and shine look at ourselves in the mirror? I think you mentioned that earlier. What can I do to make this relationship better, higher performing, more connected to the business? It's a lot of introspection that we need to do. And so we might be able to create the goals just based on an exercise like that. Have I answered your
What I,
question?
what I like to think about with the part about relationships and
Hmm.
how do we bring some accountability to those. I like simple things. Have we built
Hmm.
out the org chart? Have we built out,
Hmm.
like, literally, like, do we know who these people are? Do we know who works for whom? Do we have blind spots on the org chart? Do we know who really owns the budget? Do we know who really makes the decisions? Do we know that our executive sponsor, decision maker, champion? I like to see all that stuff, and clean, black and white. Like, is it written down? Not in somebody's head. Have we written it
Right.
down? I also like to know the engagement metrics. When's the last time anybody talked to any of these people? Because it's one thing to say, "Oh yeah, I met the CMO when the project started, and that was 14 months ago." And you're like, "Well, that's not good enough." Uh, and so we also
Right.
need to be looking at how
How
much
many
heat is in the
in-person
system.
meetings? Exactly. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the goal. We're going to meet with the client quarterly. We're going to meet in person every
yeah,
quarter. Maybe it's
yeah,
every month, whatever it is. Yeah, no, you're right.
yeah. I think a lot of that stuff needs to be tracked, and the growth bit. Yes, like, have a handle on your numbers and understand, are you getting measured by retention, growth, profits, gross revenue, net revenue? There's so many different elements. Pick whatever one matters for your business and for your situation, and orient around that, and create as much alignment as possible toward one single goal if you can.
Yeah.
That's certainly the best approach I'm aware of.
The number that is hard to decide what it's going to be, and it's more important to me that it exists as a metric and maybe not a number, is how many opportunities have you uncovered for us to mine, right, as incremental opportunities. They may not come to fruition. It takes a team, right? It takes a village to bring an idea to fruition. But having the sensibility, right? They're proactive problem solvers, Alex, in this case, and they're listening with their spidey sense for what those opportunities are, or reading, learning about the business, finding other divisions, right? Other parts of the business where there may be some opportunities. So bringing those ideas back to the ranch and talking about them with the extended team. Hey, I was over there, we were talking, they introduced me to, Susie, she's in whatever division, and they were talking about their website is, really in need of some love, whatever the conversation is. But, if that is you could argue every month you should be coming forward with, again, it's completely, the number and the regularity of it is hard to quantify, but that you have that sensibility, you're a problem solver, you're listening and looking and reading and finding little problems that need to be solved. And the more of those that you uncover, the more likely you are to find some that actually make sense for the agency to engage with. And you never know where it will lead.
You have laid out, I think, for us very clearly a path to what the future can look like, moving from a management mindset to a leadership mindset. That's the core of what I'm getting from this conversation. In order to do that, you can develop yourself and build your own skills and build your networks and do the things that you need to do. And it's up to you to take charge of that stuff. And that, by the way, is a hallmark of high agency. And
Exactly.
so I like the way all this stuff is therefore merging in concepts, or like they're playing off each other.
They do. No, it's so interesting how it's all connected. I know. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, you got it.
Any last thoughts on where we go from here?
Well, just, take another look at your account team. I mean, if we're talking to, agencies at large, I think that, again, there are a lot of account teams that are equipped and capable of much more, but they're not being asked to do it. We have to start by re-examining the expectations that we've put on them, and know that oftentimes they're capable of doing more. And in the agency world, again, we are really struggling to drive value and build these relationships with our clients in a way that has more creativity, more positive business outcomes. So just a little change from our account team can make a big difference in our client agency relationship. So let's think of them as being drivers of value and not cost engines. And call me crazy, but I think it's a difference maker.
I think so. I think so too. And I think we're getting there. Well, Lori Bartle, thank you so much for joining me. It was great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Alex.